So if we just look at the basics of eSTAR, the template itself is an interactive PDF, and it's a form that guides the applicants through the process of preparing a comprehensive and complete medical device submission. It is automated, so the form construction has got some autofill sections. The content and structure is complementary to the CDRH's internal review templates, and it's an integration of multiple resources that include guidance documents and other databases. They have guided instructions for each section, and the best part is that there is automatic verification built in. The software and operating systems required is Acrobat Pro DC or the latest Acrobat Pro Windows versions or Foxit. FDA created this to create advantages in their own review process to make it more efficient and consistent and to improve overall productivity. It also fulfills a MDUFA commitment that they made to streamline and make more efficient the pre-market reviews with the goal of ensuring patients more timely access to safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices. So as we mentioned before, this was mandatory as of October 1, 2023. For all 510K submissions, they have to be submitted using eSTAR. And the pre-submissions, de novos, and PMAs submitted through eSTAR are still voluntary until further notice, but you can anticipate that those are going to be required probably sooner rather than later, especially for the pre-submissions. Starting February 4 of 2024, only version 5 of the template will be accepted, and older versions are going to be retired effective that date. So this also means that if you've got an eSTAR, if you're in the process of building eSTAR with version 4, you need to retire. You will need to move to version 5 before you submit if you're not going to make it in before February the 4th, which is this Sunday. So something that's interesting is that if you are working in a version of eSTAR, you can't necessarily assume just based off of the links on the website or the names of the links on the FDA website that you're working in the current version. Because right now, if you were to click this link, it doesn't download just version 5, but it downloads the most current minor revision, which is version 5.1. So they've already made a change to this since December when they launched version 5. Yeah, so version 5 was released December the 6th. It includes increased cybersecurity details, improvements to the flow of the biocompatibility sections, and it added a lot of detail to the clinical investigation updates. And we'll go into some detail about what those changes were and what they mean later. Overall, eSTAR represents a changing strategy to FDA's documentation review. Prior to eSTAR in the e-copy format, it was more of a pull documentation from the FDA about any documentation that the FDA felt either wasn't in the submission or wasn't complete and accurate in the submission, that they would have to either write an AI or send interactive request for that information. With eSTAR, it's more of a push from industry to the FDA because the template is expected to help flush out in advance while the 510K is being compiled so that manufacturers push the right information and enough of the right information to the FDA.
I understand that there are as many as 100 different or more separate PDFs that get attached to a submission,
yeah,
correct?
Yeah, so we will talk in depth about the attachments. It's really tricky because you have to, normally there would be in like a traditional e-copy, there would be multiple different attachments. Here, you're supposed to consolidate all your attachments for a particular section into one giant attachment. which causes problems with pagination. Like, how do you paginate based off of the overall count for the total PDF, or do you paginate like for each sub attachment within the attachment? So it gets a little unwieldy for the PDFs. So it's an interactive review format, basically on how you answer questions. Opens up or closes down different sections of the template. So by selecting a pre-market notification for a 510K, it is going to automatically close off questions that are only applicable to de novos or PMAs. So by selecting pre-market notification, then you've got an option to select which type of pre-market notification. New in this version 5 in December is that they've added PMA in addition to de novos. And so then it just continues to build custom content based off of your answers to the questions. So you're supposed to streamline supporting attachments, like I just mentioned. You combine attachments so that you only have one attachment provided in eSTAR to each question. So each question will have a section where you can upload an attachment relevant to that section and all of the questions in that section.
One person asked, can we do zip file attachments?
That is a good question. I don't believe I have not used a zip file. I've just done one big attachment. I don't think that they have the capability on the other side to open zip files or links to other file sharing platforms in case it gets too big. And we'll talk about file size here shortly. So tips for making your file attachments is to use smart naming conventions to facilitate finding the attachments. Use things like sequential numbering, a title that matches the attachment description in the eSTAR. And then there are acceptable attachment formats that include PDF, Word, Excel. And new with the eSTAR is that they'll take MP3s. In the past, you did not have the luxury of putting MP3 into eCopy format, but now with the eSTAR that they're starting to accept video clips, which you can, you have the old phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but now that you can add video to it too, it can tell a whole story about your product and how it works. So, but this means you're not going to have all those miscellaneous file folders, like Sean just alluded to, where you've got hundreds and hundreds of random attachments that it's not really clear what section that they go with. So be sure to review all the questions carefully. For instance, the device description that's included in the template. You've got a part where you can enter a device description directly in the template, or you could do it in an attachment, or you could put one level of detail in the template and put a full device description in the attachment. But be very mindful that anything you put in a yellow text box can be made into the 510K summary that is publicly available. So anything with a yellow header up here like this, you need to be very careful that you don't put anything that's proprietary or overly detailed, because we'll talk about how to build a 510K summary in the template in a minute. And so that's going to be really important. So if we look at the differences in eSTAR as a whole versus the normal 510Ks, there is additional traceability information that's related to guidance documents used, and each section in the template has a subsection to fill in applicable guidance documents that you might have used, be it a product specific or a technology specific or a scientific, like maybe biocompatibility, which this is unique in the context of how the contents of a normal 510K. Which, if you look at what this infers, though, when I was in industry, and even still, I have clients argue with me that guidance documents are voluntary. Well, if every single section of the 510K now has an opportunity for you to talk about the guidance document, this voluntary guidance document that you use to demonstrate that you are compliant or that you fully fulfill requirements, is it really optional? Is it really voluntary? So to me, this is a big thing that is showing you where FDA's mindset is around these guidance documents. If you're not going to implement them, you need to be prepared for why what you did was appropriate or better than what's in the guidance document.
One person had asked about if the PDFs are going to be confidential, but you mentioned that the yellow part is not. I imagine that any attachments are. Is
They are.
that the difference with the confidentiality?
Correct. It's only the text that's entered in the box that's not confidential when it has the yellow header. It's everything in the attachment is treated as confidential.
Yeah, I would think that's an important thing for people to be aware of. So I just wanted to underscore, what is confidential and what isn't. And then there was another question about PDF or Word doc. I believe the answer is PDF. Does it matter?
It technically doesn't. You have the option to send the attachments in a Word document. I personally wouldn't, because I would want to know that what they're looking at wasn't unchanged either, even unintentionally changed. So.
Okay, so here are the poll results. 27 of 137 people are previously done this, and 110 are awaiting their chance.
Perfect. Well, then this is some good context then for the bulk of the people here. Okay, so we'll continue discussing kind of just the eSTAR program as a whole versus the normal way of submitting a 510K in the old e-copy. So another difference is that now in the eSTAR application, you have to upload or attach your previous communications that include 513Gs, pre-submissions, previous NSEs or withdrawals or EUAs. So you can imagine how bulky size-wise a eSTAR template could get, because maybe a pre-submission isn't huge, but if you had a previous submission that was NSE or withdrawal, you have to attach the entire previous submission, which is already huge, plus all your AIs that came with it. So just be aware that this is a difference, and it's going to put at the FDA's fingertips all of that prior communication so that they don't have to go back and look for it in their own records. You did have to talk about in the old 510Ks, you had to mention if you had one of these, but you didn't have to physically put the documents into the submission. So that's a big difference. So there is a requirement in the eSTAR where you have to give very specific details for sections like labeling. And this is a change that we're going to talk about in version 5 that opened up even more sections where you have to cite the attachment, number, name, however you've chosen to identify it, and the page number where they need to look and cross-reference your answer to some specific questions. So this isn't just an example of the FDA is not going to go digging for this information anymore. Again, they expect you to push the information to them and exactly where to find it in the submission. So some sections are different, and this is where they took an opportunity to make a lot of things make more sense. In the way that eSTAR builds forms, there are several that you don't need as independent attachments anymore. And so things like the submission cover sheet and indications for use form have essentially gone away because that information auto builds and populates as the eSTAR gets populated. And then it also is excluded some previously required forms that in some of these didn't make sense, like the class 3 summary statement. As part of 21st Century Cures in about 2018, the FDA started reclassifying all that weird little niche of class 3 products that required a class 510K as opposed to a PMA. There's none of those left anymore. And so therefore that form has been removed. They've removed the financial disclosure form. And then one of the best features of the eSTAR is the declaration summary reports for standards no longer require you to fill out a separate form or report. These are now generated for you in the way that the eSTAR populates. So if we look at a SWOT or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis of the eSTAR, we have got a strength is that there is no refuse to accept anymore due to this automatic verification that's built in. So this, in theory, means that you could get faster substantive interaction in your review. But some people have said that they've seen no difference in the timeline. And the reason is they don't call it RTA per se anymore. There's not that form that you have to fill out or should have been filling out about the RTA process. They don't have to do it internally, but they do a technical documentation review, which they still review your eSTAR and make sure that you answer the questions correctly and then therefore have the right set of information attached. So one eSTAR we know of, still the technical documentation review still took 2 weeks, so it was really no faster than the RTA. So you can't always guarantee that. So it aligns with the FDA's internal review templates, and it has the integration of guidance document integrations. So you've got these blue question marks that have help pop-ups that tell you, some informative text or expectations of the FDA associated with that question. So if you're wondering exactly what they mean, there's more context under these blue question marks. And then the questions, if you answer yes or no, they kind of have a self-check built in. For instance, like you indicated that the device has wireless technology, but you said that the device uses software and wireless does not have, you did not indicate that it has software, sorry. So how can you have wireless technology and not have software? Make sure that you answered those questions correctly. So that can be helpful to make sure it's consistent. Strengths continued is you have the option to automate that 510K summary in creation by checking yes, you would like to either yes, you would like to attach one on your own that you created in a document independently of this auto creation, or no, you want the template to build it for you. So then that means that any topic throughout the whole template, not just the device description section that I gave as an example earlier, but any topic in yellow will be a part of that 510K summary, and anything that you enter as an answer in that text box will be included automatically in that 510K summary if you check no. So again, I just can't emphasize this enough. Be very careful about the proprietary information that you put in those text boxes for yellow prompts. This is what an automatic 510K summary looks like. We saw one in a recently cleared knee joint. And so you can tell that it auto-populates because it looks in almost the exact same format in which the questions were asked in those sections in the eSTAR template. But it has a lot of information in some level of detail that people typically don't put in a 510K summary because, you know, as regulatory professionals, you know that you know your competitors are looking at your 510K summary to be able to say that they're the same or equivalent to you. So these are very guarded in the way you craft these. And then also the format, while it's more standardized, it's a little clunky in the way it shows up in some of the sections, particularly pertinent to the testing. So if we look at the strengths continued, we have automated completeness verification. And so when you start out, it will have, based off of the questions that you answered about your product technology, it will have all the sections that you need to populate based off of those answers and if they're complete or incomplete. So always make sure that these are green and not red so that you can get to a positive effectiveness verification. We talked about a new thing in the eSTAR in general is the creation of standards forms, and it auto-populates the FDA recognition number and title. So these drop downs, if you know just one of these numbers, you put it in, and then it's going to put in the opposite number of what you put in, and it's going to fill in the name of the standard and the type. This is also interesting. If you have to select if you are using this standard for either general use or for a declaration of conformity. So a general use means you didn't follow the standard necessarily to a T, but you used it for a general purpose of maybe a particular test or acceptance criteria selection. But if you selected a declaration of conformity, that's when it starts building the form, the declaration of conformity for you. So the other strength is that once you populate the product code in the classification section, it will automatically populate a guidance document for you. Now, this is not necessarily technology specific, you know, for something like software, but, you know, again, this one we're doing an infusion pump. The guidance document is infusion pumps total product life cycle guidance for FDA industry and staff. And so it prompts you to make sure that you have considered elements of this guidance document. But don't necessarily rely on this feature all on its own because this doesn't include draft guidance documents. Now, you don't necessarily have to be compliant to draft guidance documents, but they do show you what FDA's current thinking is for a particular product code, and it may foreshadow types of additional information requests that you could get. So new and improved to version 5.0 is that before in version 4 and prior, for the biocompatibility section, you actually had to click through each type of test and put in either a justification for not doing it or an attachment for it. So now you don't have to, you just select which ones you did. It starts populating the template based off of that, and you put in a single attachment that has all of the biocompatibility tests that you did compiled into a single file. So this is also an improvement. They've improved the help drop downs in the biocompatibility that gives the FDA's interpretation of some of these classifications to make sure that the way that you selected to do your testing in terms of maybe the communication pathway or the contact duration is consistent for how the FDA is going to interpret and testing that they're going to expect. For instance, this says if your device or system includes a breathing gas pathway component, be aware it is evaluated as externally communicating with contact to tissue, bone, and dentin. So if you didn't do your testing to that, right off the bat, you can tell from the help text, your submission's likely going to get an AI. So cybersecurity was a huge change. In prior revisions, it only had, maybe 4 questions that made up less than half a page of the submission drop-downs before the answers and attachments were put in. And now it's gone into several pages worth of the submission. And the cybersecurities are for the eSTAR, they're very stringent, they're very specific now, and make sure that you read carefully because again, these questions and the help text are loaded with the FDA's expectations and interpretations, and you have to make sure that you made the right decisions in your cybersecurity documentation and development process.
Yeah, my understanding is that they realigned 5.0 with the October 2023 cybersecurity regulation for medical devices, and so now everything that's in the legislation or in the regulation is in 5.0.
Yep, it's exactly right. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But you remember when I gave the example earlier about the specificity that was required in certain sections, like the labeling of what attachment was it in and what page number is it on. Well, the cybersecurity has really gone far down a rabbit hole, or trying to avoid the FDA going down the rabbit hole, but now you have to go down the rabbit hole in your own attachment. And now not only do you have to say what section and page number in the attachment is it on, you have to break down very specific topics that are required in that particular report or question, and where that topic is, not just the broad question in general. So what this means is that FDA is not playing Where's Waldo with your 510K anymore. They're not going to go rummaging through all your attachments, trying to look for the specific thing out of the guidance document. And this is one of the things that I feel like is a takeaway if you have a lesson learned about what to expect in future 510Ks or future eSTAR versions, is I feel like you're going to see more and more sections move towards asking for that specificity in where it's at in your eSTAR.
Should we do a quick poll question? And then while we're doing that, there's been one person asking, they think that they're working in a previous version. Do they need, does that person need to start over?
Unfortunately, yes. I don't think that that's required for minor revisions. So like if you're working in 5 and you download it and see it's 5.1, FDA is not requiring the minor revisions to be updated, but effective February the 4th, they're not accepting any more version 4s.
Okay, so just is there any way to update from one to the other, or do you need to just simply start over?
I don't know of any way to port anything over. I think you're just going to have to start over. So, back to the cybersecurity changes, the FDA is now requesting, so many details. And so it's going to be important. Again, don't just read the question, which is specific, pretty specific already, but make sure you read that help text about what they're meaning and the details that they're meaning behind the question that they're going to be expecting in your attachments. So like Sean mentioned, this guidance document came out in September of 2023. And it contains a lot of recommendations that are exactly the same as the eSTAR template. So we're just right back to my point of this guidance is the voluntary, cybersecurity, and yet the eSTAR for the content of a 510K is exactly the same. So how can you argue that this is voluntary when if you don't answer those questions, you're gonna get an additional information request. So what else is interesting is that I am seeing people, regardless of the either the classification of their software, the risk level of their product, the likelihood of it having any type of cybersecurity issue, the FDA is requiring all of this documentation, period. Now, maybe your level of detail can vary, but it's a huge undertaking to have a device that has any type of software for any purpose. So secrets to success, make sure that you answer your initial questions correctly, or you may have whole sections about the cybersecurity and the interoperability that are blocked off from being able to be completed. So the FDA has tried to build in those cross-section reminders of, hey, you said no up here, and by clicking no, this means you're not going to have access to this section, and for more information, if this applies, go see the guidance document, etc. So again, that help text, don't just assume that you understand what the question's asking. Make sure you understand the thought, the current thinking behind the question. So more Rev 5 updates. They've added a lot of detail for 510Ks that wasn't there previously. And the purpose was to ensure clinical investigations supporting submissions are disclosed. And so they have, not only do they have a lot more questions related to clinical, but then they have a lot of help that tells you the other regulations you need to comply with, and some context around the clinical data. Particularly in the PMA and de novo sections, those have even more questions related to particularly compliance with 21 CFR Part 812. So to me, these more questions are actually helpful in some of these areas to make sure you understand their expectations. So weaknesses of the eSTAR. Be aware that there are file size limitations. So the processing of the submission may be delayed if it exceeds 1 GB in file size, which can be tricky if you get a little video happy and heavy. The file count, combine attachments so that only one attachment is provided to each question in the eSTAR, and bookmarks or tables of contents are recommended. File versions, make sure to use the current version of the eSTAR template for for complete required content. And again, note that version, just because it says version 5, there might be a 5.1, 5.2, so on and so forth till they come out with 5.6. Just by clicking through, the title itself won't tell you that. So use the most updated versions of the PDF applications. There is a known JavaScript bug in certain Adobe Acrobat Pro applications that causes dynamic PDFs like eSTAR to run slower than normal. And so this is even directly on the FDA's website where they warn you of this and warn you of which ones are more friendly, and that they are working directly with Adobe to resolve this bug. This process is still being worked out because You're supposed to submit the eSTAR through the collaboration portal or communication. I can't remember if it's collaboration or communication portal, but I say the FDA like kind of broke their own internet here because even though that it was required on October 1, there are known issues with the portal being able to upload some eSTARs, and in those cases, you have to send them in on a flash drive like the old days of eCopy. And you've got to send those to the Document Control Center instead of through the portal. There are several sections that require signatures, like the truthful and accuracy, and other ones that the official correspondent must finalize, which can be very tricky in a PDF of this sort. And then how to manage the attachments, how to validate the signatures. So there are workarounds, but again, it takes some creativity. And in practice, file collaboration has to occur outside of eSTAR because the eSTAR does not track changes. Your file sharing of the template itself can be very difficult. And if you rely on interactive editing or editing with multiple people, like from a collaboration between the manufacturer and the consultants, using solely eSTAR template can get complex and difficult because you don't know what the people reviewing it, who made a change, where they made a change, what the change was. Personally, we still work in Word documents outside of the eSTAR, and then everybody blesses it, gives their seal of approval, and then we copy and paste completed sections over into the text boxes. Which brings us to our next weakness. There are limited text sections, which means there's limited space for viewing and scrolling, and that there's no formatting supported. And the content, again, is used to populate the 510K summary if that's used. So again, don't include confidential information. But here's an example. So no matter how much text you put in there, you only see 3 to 4 lines of text. So if you wanted to work with somebody else on your team, you've got to, and they put some text in here, you've got to click and scroll and scroll and scroll 3 lines at a time, which is very hard for text-heavy applications to mentally keep up. Well, what did I just read? What was that last sentence I just read? Then you got to scroll back up and scroll back down. And so that's why we still work in Word. Opportunities. So what does this mean for the future of the 510K program? Well, they're still working towards global harmonization initiatives, particularly with Health Canada, but this still has a lot of questions because, you know, Canada and other countries have different classifications. They have classification methodologies. Some devices might be class 1 in one country, class 2 in another. So it's kind of, there's a lot that's going to have to come together from a regulatory perspective besides just standardizing the submission format. They plan to continue the expansion to other submission types. Last year, they launched both pre-submissions and PMAs. We anticipate other types of Q submissions like 513Gs coming down the path. Threats. The template crashes. It's so big and so slow, you could be in the middle of something, and if you didn't save early and often, you could lose a good chunk of your work. The other threat is that somebody in your organization made a change and you didn't realize it, and maybe what they said wasn't accurate. Wasted time. There's way too much time in front of your computer waiting for this interactive PDF to cooperate and to populate or to load or upload. Minor template revision changes or major ones while you're in the middle, like the person who asked the question earlier. And the threats might be mostly to your mental health in this whole process between the template crashing, changing, and your wasted time. Definitely need to be playing a game on your phone on the side when you're trying to upload. So just a recap of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so if we look at, you know, what are people really saying about this? My favorite is it's a pain, short and sweet. But it's a little bit of a mix. People either really love it or they really hate it. So it's new to everyone, even the FDA. So there's a learning curve for everybody in this process. And the user face on the FDA end is different. So they're working out their own kinks as well. And then the FDA has a FAQ. You know, we'll be publishing an FAQ from questions we didn't get to throughout this discussion. And we'll be asking Patrick Axtell from the FDA as well for ones we haven't come across yet. RIMSIS has a training where Patrick and another gentleman from the FDA actually gave the presentation. So if you want to hear the FDA talk about this directly, if you need more information, you know, be sure to check that out. So if you look at how to optimize the process, you know, there's steps to success, which is download the current eSTAR from FDA, populate the required sections, note the color if they have changed from red, green, or gray. And then at the end, you know, make sure the status bar says eSTAR complete. But your secrets to success to get there are to use the most recent template version. Recommend preparing the Word document for team collaboration and then enter that text into the eSTAR. Utilize that instructional and help content where applicable, even if you felt confident in the way you understood the question. Do not include confidential information in those text boxes. Use a smart naming convention for your file attachments. And save the template after every single change, every attachment, every text addition, everything to prevent preliminary crashing, or if it does, you've lost a minimal amount of work. Make sure you use that verification section to see what's missing and track your progress, and then make sure that each section turns green and gives you an ultimate green status eSTAR complete. Send it electronically unless you manage to crash the customer collaboration portal. So what about requests for additional information? Your first option is to continue to submit responses to additional information requests in an eCopy format. Or your second is that you can use the eSTAR templates and you just select, instead of new submission, you select additional information and then copy the deficiency into one of the fields provided and then the response into the other, and then new attachments. But it kind of gets a little wonky in the eSTAR template still. So right now we're still submitted on through the eCopy. Yep, so those text boxes may not be sufficient for providing lengthy explanations that require tables, figures, formatting, etc.